The quiet woman no one noticed. The streets of New York were always busy, filled with the kind of people who didn't stop to look twice. It was a city that moved fast, where wealth and image often spoke louder than kindness. Outside a high-end, luxury boutique on Fifth Avenue, a quiet elderly woman stood by the glass door, hesitating. She wore a plain cotton saree and carried a small leather purse, old but well-kept. She didn't seem like she belonged there. Her sandals were worn, her hands aged and calloused, and her eyes held a quiet depth that no one noticed. Inside, the boutique sales staff moved gracefully between sleek shelves filled with silk scarves, leather handbags, and jewelry that glittered like stars. The air was perfumed with something expensive, and the walls echoed with soft classical music. She took a breath and stepped inside. Immediately, silence followed her entrance. One of the store clerks, a tall woman named Melissa with sharp eyes and even sharper heels, glanced at her from behind the counter. Melissa had seen women like this before, or at least she thought she had. Tourists, window shoppers, dreamers. People who couldn't afford even the ribbon on a handbag. The elderly woman stepped carefully, her fingers brushing the edge of a shelf with quiet reverence. She wasn't touching anything out of place, just looking. But it was enough for Melissa to approach her with a forced smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, but the tone didn't match the words. The woman smiled gently. "I am looking for a gift." "For my son?" Melissa looked her up and down. "And what kind of budget are we working with?" she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Something simple, but good. He has done a lot for me. I want something meaningful." Melissa tried to hold back a scoff. "Everything here is meaningful and expensive." The woman opened her purse slowly and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside was a bank draft. Not a credit card, not a diamond-studded wallet, just a bank draft. Melissa didn't even look at it. Instead, she took a small step forward and gently placed a hand on the woman's elbow. "I'm afraid we're a little busy right now. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the shops down the street. They sell some very nice things, too." The woman stood still for a moment, eyes calm, lips pressed together. Then she turned without a word and walked out. Her feet moved slowly, not with shame, but with the kind of patience only a mother who has seen life's hardest moments can carry. Outside, she looked back once, then walked into the crowd, disappearing among the people who never noticed her, to begin with. But what Melissa didn't know, what no one in that store knew, was that the woman she had just pushed out was Sundar Pichai's mother, and she hadn't come to impress anyone. She had come to say, "Thank you." The day had started differently. Earlier that morning, in a quiet apartment in Brooklyn, Sundar had called her like he always did when he traveled. He was in Europe, attending a major tech conference. Despite the time difference, he always made time to call his mother. He asked how she was, reminded her to take her medicine, and listened carefully as she told him about her week. She had mentioned wanting to find something special for him. "You always give, Beta," she had said. "I want to give back." He had laughed, softly. "Amma, your prayers are enough." But she was determined. After he hung up, he sat back, eyes heavy with gratitude. She had once walked barefoot to fetch him books when they couldn't afford a bus ride. She had skipped meals so he could have extra milk before his exams. The woman who now got dismissed from a store in New York had once built her life around his dreams without ever asking for anything in return. Back at the boutique, Melissa laughed with a co-worker. Can you believe she thought she could buy something here? What none of them knew was that their laughter would not last long. The next morning, every screen in the store lit up with breaking news. Sundar Pichai was visiting New York for a surprise event. Cameras followed him as he walked out of a black SUV dressed simply in a dark jacket and sneakers. His first stop? The very boutique his mother had entered the day before. A silence fell across the store as they saw the same woman enter again. This time with Sundar Pichai walking behind her. Melissa's heart dropped. She tried to smooth her hair, her smile, her voice, but it was too late. Sundar turned to his mother and spoke in a soft voice. "Amma, is this the store?" She nodded. He looked around, eyes sharp but calm, and then he said something that made every person in the boutique freeze. "I'd like to buy the store." The room went quiet. Even Melissa couldn't breathe. He turned to her slowly. "Yesterday, you didn't know who she was, but that's not the problem. The problem is you didn't treat her with respect." Melissa swallowed hard. I didn't mean to." "You didn't have to know she was my mother," he said, voice still, calm, "to be kind." The silence stretched. Sundar placed his hand on his mother's shoulder. "Amma, let's go." But before they left, he turned back once more. "Next time," he said, looking at Melissa, "see the person, not the purse." And with that, he walked out with his mother beside him, leaving a room full of stunned faces behind. But this was just the beginning, because what came next would change everything. The storm behind silence the next morning began with soft rays of light cutting through the curtains of a modest apartment nestled in Brooklyn. The city stirred with its usual rhythm, honking taxis, vendors shouting out deals, and trains rumbling below the surface. But inside that apartment, the world was still. Sundar's mother sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands gently folding her son's neatly ironed shirt. Her fingers moved with habit, not haste. Each fold was precise, thoughtful, like the way she had shaped his life, one gentle act at a time. She didn't need headlines or applause. She had raised a boy who once walked to school barefoot and turned him into a man who now stood at the summit of the world's most advanced technologies. Yet yesterday none of that mattered. Not to the store clerk. Not to the glass doors that reflected her image back like she was out of place. She had not wept. Not out loud. But a quiet ache still lingered inside her. It wasn't the humiliation that hurt most. It was the reminder that even now, even here, a simple woman was seen as invisible. In another part of the city, Sundar sat in a quiet cafe, away from the crowds and noise. He held his phone loosely in his hand, staring blankly at the screen. Overnight, the story had exploded. It wasn't just about his mother anymore. It was about how society sees people, or rather, how it doesn't. He hadn't intended to go viral. He hadn't planned for outrage. All he had done was speak a truth he could no longer ignore. And now that truth was opening old wounds he thought had healed. His mind drifted back to his childhood in Chennai. He remembered the long walks, to school under the hot sun, the sound of metal lunchboxes clanking together in the hands of other students. He remembered how his mother used to wait outside school gates under the same sun, shielding herself with nothing but the corner of her saree. And he remembered the time he had overheard a parent whisper, "He's bright, but poor kids like him never go far." But he had gone far, and his mother had been there every step of the way, never asking, never taking, always giving. Now she was being spoken about in every corner of the internet. Millions of people were praising her grace, her quiet strength. And yet, she remained untouched by the noise. She didn't even own a smartphone. She only knew that something had changed in her son's voice when he came home that evening and held her hand just a little longer than usual. Meanwhile, inside the boutique, the atmosphere had shifted from luxury to discomfort. The manager paced nervously in her office, refreshing news updates, fielding calls from corporate, and trying to prepare for a fallout she had no training for. The name Melissa was now attached to dozens of angry tweets and customer reviews. Her face was becoming a symbol of something bigger than just one mistake. Melissa sat alone in the employee break room, her perfect posture now slumped, her confidence cracked. She had worked hard to get here. Studied fashion, interned under high pressure, designers, learned how to walk the line between exclusivity and service. And somewhere along the way, she had begun to believe that style mattered more than substance, that appearances told stories, that anyone who didn't fit the image didn't belong. But that belief was now falling apart. Her mind replayed the moment Sundar had walked in, the silence that fell, the weight of his gaze, the calm disappointment in his voice. "You didn't have to know she was my mother to be kind." She had smiled at hundreds of women in that store, but her smile toward his mother had been different. Shallow, calculated, empty. Why? Because the woman wore a saree instead of a designer coat. Because her sandals were old and her hair tied with a simple clip, because Melissa had assumed something. And now, the whole world had seen it. For Sundar, the fallout wasn't personal. It was generational. It was the quiet pain his mother had carried, and that millions like her still carried. Women who had built their families with bare hands and silent strength, only to be dismissed as background characters. He decided to act, not with anger, not with revenge, but with truth. He reached out to a friend from his early Google days, someone who had left the corporate world to start a foundation supporting underrepresented women in tech and business. Together, they planned a small private gathering, not for cameras, not for journalists, but for stories. They invited women from all walks of life, caregivers, retired teachers, immigrant mothers, janitors, domestic workers. Sundar didn't want speeches. He wanted voices. The gathering took place in a humble community center in Queens. Plastic chairs, tea and paper cups, and no microphones. Just people, human beings. His mother sat beside him quietly, observing. One by one, the women spoke. A Filipino nanny named Liza shared how she was mistaken for a thief in a grocery store. An elderly African-American woman named Esther recalled the time she entered a hotel lobby to use the restroom and was escorted, out without question. A Latina housekeeper named Carmen broke down as she explained how her daughter was denied entry to a private school because of her uniform. The pain in their voices wasn't loud, but it was real, and Sundar listened with the kind of presence that felt rare in the world of billionaires and boardrooms. And then, unexpectedly, his mother stood up. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from memory. "I have lived in silence most of my life," she said gently. "Not because I had nothing to say, but because I thought the world was not ready to listen." The room grew still. I cleaned rice grains from the floor, stitched torn school uniforms, and sold old jewelry so my son could buy textbooks. And when I walked into that store, I wasn't looking for luxury. I was looking for a thank you. Tears welled up in many eyes. "I don't need a gift," she continued, "but every mother deserves respect." When she finished, no one clapped. No one needed to. The silence was fuller than applause. As they left the hall, Sundar looked at her with quiet awe, not because of what she had said, but because of who she had always been. But unknown to both of them, something else was brewing behind closed doors. A former investor of the boutique's parent company had caught wind of the story and was planning to use the scandal to spark a takeover. He had a history with Sundar, one filled with bitterness and a broken deal from years ago. Now he saw an opportunity, not just to take over the boutique chain, but to publicly challenge Sundar's values. His name? Rajesh Malhotra, a name Sundar hadn't heard in over a decade, but soon would again. Because Rajesh wasn't interested in justice, he was interested in power. And he was about to bring the storm to Sundar's door, the name he never wanted to hear again. The morning sun filtered softly through the windows of Sundar's apartment, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor. His mother sat by the window with a bowl of soaked almonds in her lap, quietly peeling the skins off each one with patient fingers. It was her ritual, like so many other small things she had done her entire life without complaint, without noise. Sundar stood in the kitchen nearby, watching the kettle as it hummed just before boiling. He could see her reflection in the glass, framed in light, calm, grounded, timeless. But beneath the stillness of the morning, Sundar felt something unsettling stir within him. The night before, he had received a message, a short email, no greeting, no signature, just 5 words. "We're not done, are we?" He didn't need a name. He recognized the style, the cold confidence, the quiet threat hidden between lines. It was a ghost from the past, a name he had hoped he would never hear again, Rajesh Malhotra. Many years ago, before the world knew his name, Sundar had pitched an idea to a group of venture capitalists. It was modest, experimental, an early version of a language tool he believed could change how people used technology. Rajesh Malhotra was among the investors who sat across the table, dressed in expensive suits and colder smiles. Back then, Sundar had no fame, no power, just an idea and faith in its purpose. But Rajesh didn't see promise. He saw profit. He wanted to own the idea outright, wanted full control, wanted Sundar to step aside and let the company swallow his creation. When Sundar refused, the deal broke apart. Words were exchanged. Harsh ones. Rajesh never forgot the rejection. And now, after all these years, after Sundar had climbed mountains Rajesh never could, it seemed the man had found a reason to return. This time, not to steal an idea, but to damage a legacy. Sundar didn't tell his mother about the email. She had seen enough. And he didn't want her peace disturbed by the sharp edges of old rivalry. But something told him the days ahead would not be kind. He could feel the air changing, like a storm just beyond the horizon. As he sat down at the table across from her, she looked at him quietly. "Your tea is getting cold," she said with a smile. He nodded, but didn't lift the cup. She leaned forward gently. "You're thinking too loud." He couldn't help but smile at her words. "Amma, do you ever regret coming here, leaving everything behind?" She shook her head, peeling another almond. "Regret only comes when we don't try. I came here for you, not for a place." He lowered his eyes, touched by the truth in her voice. "But I don't like how the world is treating you now," he admitted. She looked out the window for a moment. "This world, it doesn't owe me kindness, Sundar. But I won't let it change me either." Those words echoed in his mind the rest of the day. Meanwhile, in a gleaming office tower near Central Park, Rajesh Malhotra leaned back in a leather chair, staring at a wall of digital news articles plastered on a screen. He scrolled through images of Sundar's mother, her calm face, the moment in the boutique, the gathering at the community center. "Perfect," Rajesh muttered. He had always known Sundar was smart. Maybe too smart. But what he lacked, Rajesh believed, was a killer instinct. Sundar built things to help people. Rajesh built things to control them. And now, he was planning to make a move that would force Sundar into the public arena, not as a CEO, not as an inventor, but as a man forced to defend the one thing most sacred to him, his mother. Rajesh had just acquired a major share in the luxury boutique's parent company. It was a silent buy-in disguised through proxy firms. He didn't want attention yet. He wanted leverage. And now, he was calling for a press conference. Not to apologize, but to question the narrative. The next morning, headlines exploded again. Investor questions validity of Sundar Pichai's story, calls for full footage and investigation. It was a headline designed to cast doubt, to rewrite a story the world had already embraced. People began arguing online. Some defended Sundar and his mother fiercely. Others, usually anonymous accounts, started demanding proof. "Where's the video? How do we know it happened the way he said? Was this just a publicity stunt?" It hit Sundar like a blow to the chest. His mother stayed silent as always, but he noticed her taking longer pauses in her daily activities. She would look at the television, then lower the volume without saying a word. He hated that. He hated that a moment meant to honor her was now becoming a battlefield. He decided to act again, but this time, not through interviews or speeches. He reached out to the boutique's employees. Not the management, the workers, the ones no one ever interviewed, the ones who had seen what really happened that day, and slowly, quietly, the truth began to unfold. One staff member, a part-time college student named Ruby, reached out. She had been in the store that day, working in the stockroom. She remembered everything. And more importantly, she had footage, not from the boutique's cameras. They had strangely been under maintenance that day. But from her personal phone. She had taken a photo for a college project on retail customer behavior. In that photo, Sundar's mother was seen being gently guided toward the exit by Melissa. You could see the discomfort in her face, the cold posture of the staff. And though it was blurry, the truth was clear. Sundar asked Ruby to speak only if she wanted to. She didn't hesitate. A week later, in a calm video posted online, Ruby spoke. Not in a flashy way, not in a viral tone, just honestly. I was there. She was kind, quiet, respectful, and we treated her like she didn't belong. I regret that. The video spread like warmth through a cold room. People began to rally again, not with rage, but with empathy. Rajesh, watching the response, clenched his jaw. He wasn't used to losing control, but Sundar wasn't playing by corporate rules anymore. He was protecting something no one could put a price on, his mother's dignity. And in doing so, he was beginning to show the world a different kind of power. Not the loud kind, not the rich kind, but the kind that came from doing the right thing, even when it hurt. Yet deep beneath all this, another challenge was rising. Because Rajesh had one more move left, he wasn't going to attack Sundar's mother anymore. He was going to attack Sundar's past, and he had found something no one else knew. Secrets Sundar had buried long ago, back when he was just a boy with big dreams and empty pockets. And Rajesh was going to use it to break him. The memory he tried to forget, the sound of raindrops tapping against the window, seemed to echo through the apartment like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. Sundar stood in front of the mirror, buttoning the sleeves of his shirt slowly. He had a long day ahead, a board meeting in the morning, a foundation event in the evening. But his thoughts were not on any of those things. They were on a boy, a younger version of himself. Skinny, quiet, hopeful. A boy who once made a choice that changed everything. He thought he had left that chapter behind, locked it away. But now it was back. And this time, it was being dragged into the light not by regret, but by revenge. In a tower downtown, Rajesh Malhotra leaned over a folder that had just been delivered to his office. Inside was a file, weathered from age, copied from records, that were once buried deep inside a school system Sundar had long since left behind. It wasn't illegal, but it was cruel. It was a file that told a story most would have left untouched, and Rajesh, smiling coldly, was ready to use it. His assistant hovered nearby, uncertain. "Are you sure you want to go this far?" Rajesh didn't even look up. "I don't play to win small. If he wants to build an empire on morality, then he better be ready to explain the cracks in his own story." The next day, headlines struck, like a thunderclap. Uncovered report reveals Sundar Pichai was suspended for cheating during high school exams. Was it covered up? The article was thin, the details vague, but it was enough. Enough to stir doubt, enough to make people wonder. Sundar's name trended again, this time under hashtags like "Just Truth Behind the Tech" and "Tar Sundar's Secret." News anchors debated it, influencers speculated, and trolls fed on it like wildfire. In the apartment, his mother sat in silence. She didn't look at the screen. She didn't need to. She just whispered one word. "No." Sundar sat beside her, his fingers loosely clasped together, his eyes staring at the floor. "It was true," he said quietly. "I did cheat. Once." She turned to him slowly, her face soft with heartbreak. Not because of what he had said, but because of the pain he carried all these years without telling her. He took a deep breath. "I was 16, final exams. We couldn't afford the tuition for the next year, and I knew if I failed even one subject, it was over. No college, no future." She placed her hand over his. "Amma," he said, eyes wet but unblinking. "I copied 2 answers, just 2. And when the teacher found out, he didn't tell the principal. He called me into his office and asked me why. I told him the truth." His voice cracked. He looked at me for a long time, then tore the report in half. He said, "If you ever cheat again, you won't become anything. But if you learn from this, you'll go further than anyone else." His mother didn't speak for a long moment. Then, softly, she said, "You never told me." "Because I was ashamed. Because I didn't want you to think I had become someone you wouldn't be proud of." She shook her head gently, her thumb rubbing the back of his hand. "Beta, I raised you to be honest, not perfect." Meanwhile, The world outside roared with opinions. Some said the past didn't matter. Others said it proved he was a fraud. But among the noise, a different kind of voice began to rise. Teachers, former classmates, even the teacher who had given him that second chance, now retired, living quietly in India, came forward in a video interview. He was the most hardworking boy I had ever seen. And yes, he made a mistake. But he faced it, he corrected it, and he never repeated it. The video went viral. People listened, and they began to remember something important. Mistakes don't define us. Growth does. But Rajesh wasn't done. His plan had been to shake Sundar's foundation, but instead, he had revealed its strength, and he hated that. He needed something bigger. And so he decided to go further. He began contacting board members of Sundar's foundation, leaking misleading information about funding, partnerships, and influence. He painted a picture of a man whose public generosity was just a mask for private control, a smear campaign designed to isolate him, make him question everything he had built, and for a moment it worked. Sundar walked into his office the next day and found a resignation letter on his desk. His communications director. Loyal, hardworking, tired. I can't keep defending something. The world is tearing apart, she had written. I believe in you, but I can't take this anymore. He sat in his chair for hours, staring at the words, wondering if he had asked too much of the people around him, wondering if trying to do the right thing was worth it when every step forward seemed to be followed by another push backward. He went home that evening drained, barely able to lift his head. His mother met him at the door. He didn't say anything. But she did. Do you remember when you were 7 and the school told us you couldn't join because you didn't have shoes? He nodded. I walked 10 kilometers that day, borrowed shoes from your uncle, and went back the next morning. He smiled faintly. But not to ask again, she said. I went back to start teaching sewing to the headmistress. She needed help, and in return she let you in. He looked at her surprised. You never told me that. Some battles are not fought with loud voices, Beta. They're fought with quiet actions. Her eyes filled with light. But you must keep fighting, because people are watching. Not for you to be perfect, but for you to stay human. That night Sundar wrote a public letter, not to defend himself, but to tell the full truth. He wrote about the cheating, about the shame, about the teacher who gave him a second chance, and about the millions of young boys and girls out there who are forced into corners where mistakes are born not from weakness but from desperation. He ended the letter with one line. I don't want to be remembered for never falling. I want to be remembered for rising again and bringing others with me. The letter went viral. News outlets picked it up. People reposted it, quoted it, turned it into murals and posters. Rajesh watched it unfold from his office, jaw tight, eyes burning. He had planned to break Sundar. Instead, he had helped him become more real to the world than ever before. But Rajesh had one last card. One final move. He was about to bring Sundar's mother into the war, not with lies, but with a truth no one saw coming. And when it came out, it wouldn't just shake Sundar's world. It would change everything he believed about the woman who raised him. The secret she never spoke. The house was quiet that evening. Too quiet. Even the walls lined with books, framed photos, and soft golden light seemed to hold their breath. Sundar sat at the edge of the couch, his elbows on his knees, fingers tightly laced together. He stared ahead, not at anything in particular, but into a space where thoughts collided and refused to settle. His phone lay on the coffee table, screen black. Silent. His mother moved quietly in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, with the same graceful rhythm she had used for years. The sound of the knife against the cutting board was steady, almost meditative. Yet there was tension in the air, an invisible thread pulling between them. She could feel it. She always could. She placed the knife down gently, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked over to him. What is it, Beta? She asked, settling down beside him. He hesitated, then slowly reached for the phone, unlocked it, and handed it to her. On the screen was a headline that hit her like a silent storm. Exclusive. Sundar Pichai's mother once arrested in 1977 for campus protest. Was this hidden to protect his image? Beneath the headline was a grainy black and white photo of a young woman with determined eyes and a raised fist, standing outside a crowded university gate, surrounded by police and angry officials. His mother stared at it for a long time. Then she closed her eyes. Sundar watched her. Is it true? A long silence followed. Finally, she nodded. Yes. He leaned forward, stunned. Why didn't you ever tell me? She let out a breath, deep and slow, and folded her hands in her lap. Because some truths, my son, live best in the quiet until they are ready to be understood. Her voice was calm, but beneath it was the weight of something long buried. I was 18, she began, eyes distant. Your grandfather was sick. Our village had no clean water. Children were falling ill, and the government promised they would send help, but they never did. Her voice softened. So I joined a protest, not for politics, for survival. She paused, then continued. It started peacefully. We stood outside the university gates with signs, chanting for the local minister to visit our village. But the crowd grew and someone threw a rock. Police came. There was shouting, panic. I was pushed forward, and when they grabbed people, they grabbed whoever was closest. Sundar listened, wide-eyed. This was a version of his mother he had never met. They took me to the station, kept me for one night. No charges. But the school expelled me, and people started calling me a troublemaker. Her eyes filled not with tears, but with the kind of pain that stays locked behind the eyes. Your grandfather begged the school to take me back, but they wouldn't. So I stopped studying. I started working instead, sewing for neighbors, cooking in homes. She turned to him slowly. And I never told you, because I didn't want that one night, one mistake, to become your story. Sundar leaned back, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a mistake, he said quietly. You were brave. But his mother shook her head gently. No, Beta, it wasn't bravery. It was necessity. I did what I had to, and sometimes the world punishes you for surviving. Across the city, in a glass tower wrapped in evening light, Rajesh Malhotra poured himself a drink. The article had done its work. News outlets were ablaze again. Political pundits were debating whether Sundar's mother's past made him untrustworthy. Social media was split between admiration and outrage. Rajesh sat back in his chair, satisfied. This was his final blow. He had dragged Sundar's story into the dirt, framed his mother as dishonest, and now waited for the collapse. But what he didn't anticipate, what he could never understand, was that some stories, when revealed, do not weaken people. They set them free. The next day, Sundar walked onto a stage, not at a tech conference, not at a corporate gala, but at a small community event celebrating Women's History Month. His speech was not planned. He walked to the microphone and looked out at a sea of unfamiliar faces. Then he spoke. Yesterday, the world learned something about my mother that I didn't know, and like many of you, I was shocked. He paused, but not because of what she did, because I never realized how much she had endured. He told them everything, about the protest, the arrest, the expulsion, the sewing work, the silence. And then, he said something that would echo across the country. My mother was arrested for demanding water for sick children, and they called her a criminal. But I call her something else. I call her my revolution. The room erupted into applause. It was not loud applause, but the kind that rises from hearts, not hands. After the speech, Sundar and his mother sat outside, the building sharing a quiet moment. She looked at him with both pride and sadness. I never wanted you to carry my shame, she said. He shook his head, tears in his eyes. You never gave me shame. You gave me strength. The video of the speech went viral. Again. But this time no one questioned. No one debated. They listened, Because it was real. Raw human, Rajesh Malhotra watched it all unfold and knew in that moment that he had failed. He had used every weapon, rumors, secrets, past mistakes, and yet the man he tried to destroy was standing stronger than ever, not because of power, but because of truth. A week later, Sundar's mother received a letter in the mail, not from a fan, not from a politician, but from the university that had expelled her decades ago. It was an apology and a full scholarship offer for any child in her village who wished to study. She held the letter in her hands for a long time, then placed it gently inside her prayer book. Later that evening, as Sundar sat beside her, she turned to him and said, "The world is changing, not fast, but maybe just enough." He nodded, but deep down he knew the battle was not over, because the world may have embraced his mother now, but there were still people like her being turned away, and he had a responsibility, not just to speak, but to act. Because now the world wasn't just watching him, they were hoping he wouldn't stop. The chair at the front, the day began in silence, as most important days do. It was a spring morning in New York, and the city was waking up slowly, stretching into itself. Sunlight filtered through the windows of the small apartment Sundar shared with his mother during visits. An apartment she had chosen herself years ago, tucked far away from headlines, cameras, and the chaos that often followed her son. She stood by the window, gently pouring water into the roots of her tulsi plant. She wore a soft beige saree, pressed the night before, and a thin gold chain that Sundar had given her on his first trip back to India as a CEO. Her movements were careful, deliberate. They had always been. Even as the world changed around her, she remained the same. Sundar sat at the dining table, a half-eaten bowl of oatmeal in front of him, untouched coffee growing cold by the minute. He was supposed to speak at a global summit that afternoon. One not just about technology, but about dignity, access, and truth. They had given him the keynote. But the speech was not what was on his mind. He was thinking about what came after. Weeks had passed since the firestorm. The story of his mother, the protest, the arrest, the silence, and finally the truth, had gone far beyond what anyone imagined. Her face had become a symbol, not of scandal, but of quiet power. Movements were starting in corners of the world, where no voices had been heard before. Village schools were being named after her. Policies and tech companies were being questioned. The luxury boutique that once pushed her out had since issued not one, but 3 public apologies, and was now undergoing a complete shift in its training and outreach. But to Sundar, all of that still felt incomplete. He couldn't explain it. The world had embraced their story. People had changed. But something in him was still unsettled. And it wasn't until that morning, when he looked up and saw his mother quietly folding his shawl near the couch, that he understood what it was. The world had listened, but she had never spoken for herself. Not truly, not freely, not beyond the few quiet sentences she allowed herself to say when others were in pain. "Amma," he said softly, standing up, "I need you to come with me today." She looked up, eyes full of calm curiosity. "To the summit?" He nodded. "But not just to attend, to speak." She stared at him, confused. No, I am not made for that, Beta. I don't even know what to say to a room full of cameras." "Amma," he said, stepping closer, "you've already said everything with your life. The world just hasn't heard it in your voice yet." Her lips parted as if to object, but she didn't. Not this time, because something inside her had changed too. That afternoon, as black cars lined up outside the venue, Sundar and his mother arrived quietly, without any fanfare. The event was held in a vast glass auditorium, filled with world leaders, educators, students, activists, and journalists from every continent. The program listed Sundar as the final speaker of the day, but when he walked onto the stage, he didn't head for the podium. He paused halfway, looked out at the sea of faces, and then turned back. "Before I speak," he said into the microphone, "I'd like to offer my place to someone who taught me everything I know about strength." The room turned, And then, slowly, she walked on stage. No spotlight, no applause, just a hush. She stood in front of the podium, her sari moving gently. With each step, she looked down at the paper Sundar had helped her prepare but did not open it. Instead, she looked up and she spoke. "My name is Lakshmi," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I was born in a village most of you will never visit. I never held a job with a title. I never went back to school after 18. And for many years, I believed that meant I had nothing to give." The room leaned in. But I raised a child who believed in listening, who believed that everyone, no matter how they dress or speak or walk, deserves respect. Her eyes moved across the crowd. "I am not here today to ask for your sympathy. I am here to remind you that there are millions of women like me, silent, tired, invisible, who have shaped futures you will never know. We are not decoration, we are foundation." You could hear people breathing, blinking, holding their emotions in place. You build your nations on data, on power, on innovation. That is good. But don't forget to build on decency. She paused, then turned slightly toward Sundar. "And, to every son or daughter who carries the weight of your parents' sacrifices, do not carry it as debt. Carry it as pride." When she stepped down from the stage, there was no immediate applause, just a stillness. Then someone stood, and then another, until the entire auditorium rose, one by one, not clapping for a brand or a celebrity, but for a mother who had once been pushed aside and chose, instead of bitterness, to walk forward. Days later, the speech circled the globe. It was translated into dozens of languages. It was taught in schools, and most quietly of all, it inspired policy changes in places far from any stage. Changes that allowed domestic workers to report discrimination, that created new scholarship programs for women who had been expelled for activism, that made customer service training include dignity, not just sales. In their apartment far from the spotlight, Sundar made tea. His mother sat on the balcony, her tulsi plant thriving in the sunlight. She sipped slowly, eyes closed, breathing in peace. "Amma," he asked gently, "was it all too much?" She opened her eyes and smiled. No. For the first time, it was just enough. He looked at her, his heart full, because in all his years of building systems, platforms, and pathways, he had never built something as powerful as what she had given the world in just 15 minutes. Truth. The kind that doesn't shout, but stands quietly at the front, like a mother in a saree, who once was told she didn't belong, and then taught the world what it means to belong to each other.